Welcome to the Lean AI podcast, where we're flipping the AI conversation on its head by focusing on holistic strategies and tactics that drive AI adoption, rather than focusing solely on overcoming the technical challenges of AI. In every Season 1 episode of the Lean AI podcast, we talk with corporate AI leaders just like you, who've uncovered secrets of driving successful AI adoption with far less wasted time and investment. Our guests challenge established views and offer disruptive perspectives, providing new actionable insights. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Lean AI podcast. Today, we have the pleasure of hosting Bjoern Herrmann, a visionary leader in artificial intelligence. His extensive experience includes transformative roles at Sage, where he led the company's transition into an AI-enabled technology business, and as the founder and CEO of Compass, a platform acquired by Sage that provided real-time performance benchmarks for data-driven decisions. Bjoern's career also includes currently being a founding team member of Cynch AI and co-founding Startup Genome, a research initiative with Stanford and Berkeley that examined the factors behind business success and failure. Welcome, Bjoern.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Glad to have you. So let's just jump right into it. A lot of our listeners are corporate AI executives. And so at companies including Sage, for example, you've embarked on a mission to democratize financial expertise using advanced AI technologies. Can you elaborate on your vision of what's possible with AI, maybe both in terms of transforming internal workflows and developing external AI-powered products?
I would say I look at the impact of AI in those two buckets. The sort of inner transformation, how we make the business more efficient, how we become more effective as a company, and then the augmentation of existing services or the creation of new services. And I think we all understand that we're kind of at a inflection point where AI is now in a place where things are possible that just weren't possible before. And with that, a lot of companies are sort of at the cusp of or started an AI transformation. And that's a huge process that is doesn't just consist of building AI services to support the internal or the external services, but it also includes the transformation of the business. It includes how we operate as a business. It includes changing the business model, etc. So it usually requires a lot of the company to go through this process. And I would say that largely, at least so far, AI transformation tend to fail in large corporate environments. And I would say mostly due to kind of two big buckets. One is that there's just simply a lack of skill, lack of capability in the business. And the other one is the capacity to deal with uncertainty. And so what that means is that because an AI transformation requires also changes in the business model, it requires changes in the culture, it requires the business to bring in a different kind of talent, that going through this process of not knowing where all of this is going to end up in requires a business to really hone the capacity of stepping into the unknown. And this is where agile or the lean approach is the way to go, from my experience. And then to your question in terms of what's possible, I think it's a pretty broad landscape, but sort of at the very high level, what I'm personally at the moment most excited about is that we're now in a stage where much of what used to sort of fall into the service category, so things that by and large are still being done by humans today, are now for the first time really a target for AI. Because AI is now in a place where it can deal with a degree of complexity and variability that it wasn't before. And so with that, we look at taking people that perform some kind of service function and we start to make them 2, 3, 4 times more productive. And that's going to drive a massive shift in our economy. It will take a service business that today, let's say, is a 20% margin and turn it into an 80% margin business. And that means that the business changes its category. The multiples are different, valuations are different, the investment proposition is different, everything is different. Plus, obviously, with that, we'll also see a massive impact on our economy with big shifts and changes in where and how value is being delivered. And so there's obviously also a large social impact that I believe each business that's participating in this AI transformation also has a responsibility to support us as a society to go through these changes.
So there's a lot to unpack there. And I would say one of the things we're trying to do with this podcast is extract some of that, I guess, specialized knowledge that you have in terms of the successful transformations that you've seen, and maybe even the ones that haven't gone so well. And what have you learned from those? So you said there were two buckets of things that tend to go wrong. Number one is just lack of skills. And so maybe briefly, if you could touch on, are there any skills that maybe when you say that people aren't thinking about when you say lack of skills, maybe beyond just technical? And then on the second step, you said it's about transforming a business. And maybe people don't expect that. They just think, well, we're going to apply AI to some use cases. It's going to be great. So maybe if you could go on a deep dive for what kinds of skills do you think are the ones that are usually lacking? And then in the other bucket, talk about what that transformation is and why it's necessary.
Obviously, these two buckets are tightly interlinked. And so when I speak about skills, it's really about the capacity to effectively deliver AI within an organization to clients, the internal or external clients. And so oftentimes what I've seen in large companies is when you start doing AI, you either hire a consulting firm or you hire a bunch of data scientists that sit somewhere in a corner and they build some kind of model. And then it comes to deploying that. And the engineers are like, well, this code is crap. We can't deploy this. Or the infrastructure doesn't exist to do this. Or what they built isn't actually all that useful. And so there's all sorts of challenges that come in, including accessing data and data governance and security and all of these things. And so when I talk about skills, it's not just the individual skills of being able to deliver a service in a timely manner that provides value, but it's also the sort of, I would say, the combination of skills. So it's really important to have cross-functional teams that are able to operate across the board, teams that don't just have the data scientists, they have machine learning engineers, they have product managers, they have customer support, client success people as part of the team. They have people who are good at infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. And obviously, depending on where you are in your process, in the beginning, you maybe have a smaller team that covers just the kind of product management, machine learning engineering, data science, software engineering, infrastructure capability. And then as you grow, you add more and more skill sets into it. And this team really needs to operate as a team. And what that means is that the kinds of people that you would want to have in this team are people who are what Spotify termed T-shaped, in that each person on the team is able to have sort of capacity to communicate, understand horizontally, and also has some kind of vertical expertise that they're bringing into this process. Now, for this team and for the organization at large, another core skill capacity is to be able to deal with the unknown. And this is something that we codify in an agile process, for example, or in a kind of a lean approach. But it's also something that needs to live in the culture. And it's something that each individual on the team and the leadership within a large organization needs to be ready on a personal level. And what that means is that, Google talked about the most important sort of quality of the team is safety. It's the ability to feel safe. And the reason that that's important is because if everybody feels safe, we can take risks. We can step into the unknown. We can try things. And this is as much a function of the general culture and the processes, the way that we're set up as an organization, but it's also a function of the individuals that are on the team. It's a function of them being in a good place in their lives. And if people are super stressed out with stuff going on at home, if they are going through a huge crisis, then the capacity to feel safe and to operate from that place is diminished. And so for me personally, really supporting also the individuals on the team in feeling safe, in giving them the space to take care of themselves, in really treating them sort of like a sports team. It's like in a sports team, you have coaches for everything. And it's important because when you have the team show up in a game, you want them to be at their best. And the same I see is true for those teams that are leading a transformation, both the sort of delivery team, but also the leadership, the executives within the company that are driving those changes across the company.
So this is phenomenal. I mean, so we've talked about cross-functional teams being T-shaped. We've talked about the ability to deal with uncertainty. And I guess I wanted to go one level deeper on that. So some of our listeners right now might say, look, we've got a product development process in place. We've had it for decades. And so all we're going to do is we're going to pick some AI use cases and we're going to run those through our standard product development process. And so why the need for dealing with uncertainty? Why the need for transformation? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
This is obviously painting in very broad brushstrokes, and there might be a lot more nuance depending on the company. But I would say that the sort of traditional corporate structure that we have, that let's say evolved since the 70s in the business schools in the US and is kind of widely adopted across the world today, comes from a place of, let's say, control. Control in a way that was possible because there wasn't all that much uncertainty, because we were operating under a somewhat certain assumptions. We know how the market looks like for ice cream or for milk or for this or for that. And there isn't, even though there might be some changes, by and large, we're operating in a market where we have a lot of certainty, hence a corporate structure that's very execution oriented, that's very controlling, that has functional silos, that has a lot of power hierarchies, etc., works well, or at least it works well enough. Some might argue that that structure created its own problems, which we have to deal with today, such as that sort of we systematically outsource innovation out of the corporate context. And we're now suddenly in a place where this sort of model of large companies acquiring innovation stops to work. Why? Because interest rates are going up, because the innovation cycles are getting shorter and shorter, specifically in technology. And so the sort of payoff of acquiring innovation and then milking it isn't really working anymore. And so there's a new approach that's needed. It's an approach where, or the way that we coined it at Sage, is that we bring the venture studio model into the context. And so what is a venture studio? Many of you will know some out there that essentially is some degree of structure around a set of startups. And that's really what we did at Sage, is that we started to bring that kind of thinking into the corporate context. And it's quite different to the standard sort of corporate operating model. Because suddenly when you look at projects as bets, you look at them as, oh, they have X potential, we have this much risk. And our primary sort of measure of progress is we're able to mitigate that risk. It's very different than when I look at a project that I'm trying to execute on, that I'm trying to hit certain deadlines on, that I know that if I deliver it, I'm going to get X return. All of these things I don't know within the AI space. And so there's a different approach that's required.
No, that's great. I really appreciate that. And I guess that does speak to the need for transformation of the way that AI use cases, products, workflows are developed. So I guess we talked about a cross-functional team then, and we've talked a little bit about kind of what doesn't work in the incumbent systems that are in place within a lot of large companies around the world. Now let's talk about a little bit about that new approach and why the cross-functional team. So let's say we've got a cross-functional team. What is the work that you would recommend that those teams do in order to work on an AI use case?
I would say that the primary objective of these teams is to mitigate risk and to take sort of an idea of a business model that includes a technology, and from a place where we really don't understand what's the cost structure, like how's this going to work, who's the client, who's going to use it, am I going to make money with this or drive some kind of efficiencies, what's the kind of talent that I need, etc. There's all of the unknowns, and they're all interdependent. And so the primary task of this team is to reduce the uncertainty on all of these different components of the business model and to get it to a place where we have something that's repeatable and scalable and that we can then take forward, which means that from practical perspective, we don't try to build stuff up front. We try to learn as much as we can without building. And then as we get into the building process, we don't just look at building a piece of software, but we look at the entire business model as we build the technology. And so with that, the search for a repeatable, scalable business model becomes the organizing principle for this team, which is quite different than the execution of something. So I would say that's kind of the sort of broader shift. And it means day to day that the focus really is around learning. And that shows up every day. The way you show up to meetings, the way you talk about what you're doing, what you're learning, the capacity to take learnings and implement them right away. So that sort of fluidity and agility is something that needs to be here day to day.
So that is a lot different than the setup at most big companies. So if the job of the team then is to do the kind of work you're talking about, so going in and maximizing learning, looking at the business model to find out if there's really a there behind a use case, what's the role of senior leadership in doing that? So we've talked about the teams. What's the role of kind of director level and above in helping the teams to execute that work?
So one thing that comes up for me is the research that we did with Startup Genome, which in a way took a lot of the work by Steve Blank and others and started to validate that with numbers. So we looked at thousands of startups over time. And what we found is that most startups fail not because of competition, but because they very efficiently execute the unnecessary. And so what that means in the corporate context is that leadership really are there to hold the team accountable, that they don't efficiently execute the unnecessary, but they do things that actually matter, that they actually focus on what matters most in order to either validate or invalidate the idea to ultimately get to a repeatable, scalable business model with whatever the teams are working on, and to really operate more like an investor. And what that means to operate like an investor is to also not be attached to the different ideas. There's somebody that once told me, if you want to be an investor, take $100 bill and light it on fire. And then take another one and take another one, and you continue doing it until you don't feel pain anymore. And I don't know if that's the best method, but I think it kind of brings the point home, which is we get overly attached to whatever we're working on. And this is obviously true in the corporate setting, but it's a human thing. And another study that comes to mind is some work that Correlation Ventures did, that I think they sort of combined data from venture capital firms in the US over 35 years. And one of the key findings they had is that investors invest twice as much into their losers than their winners. So they invest twice as much into their losers than their winners. And what this means for me is that we all tend to kind of hang on to something. And if something doesn't go well, we tend to hang on even more because we're like trying to kind of get it over the line. And instead of just reading the signal, just saying, okay, maybe this doesn't work, and we let it go. And that's not easy. And it's something that also is done best as a team. And so for the executive leadership team to be able to talk through these things, and as a team to be able to read the signals and to let go of ideas that are not working and to double down on things that are working and to hold each other accountable as they hold the teams on the ground accountable. I would say that's, for me, the core change in the role of leadership for an AI transformation.
It's so interesting because another way of framing what you're talking about is in traditional corporate environments, what we're doing is our incumbent process is let's go pick the winners and then build those. And I think what you're saying is we can't pick the winners with AI. There's too many use cases. There's too many opportunities, some of which are going to work, some of which aren't going to work. And so if you just try to pick the winners, you're going to be really disappointed. And so you have to start with a higher number of use cases, test those and find out which ones are the winners for as little time and investment as possible. And then once you've identified the killer use cases that can in effect run the gauntlet and prove traction with users and viability and feasibility and all the other things, then those are the ones you can really double down on. Is that accurate?
Yeah, totally. And it's also important to see that this is not easy. It's not easy to be in a leadership position doing that because as human beings, we all tend to want to know. We all tend to want to know the answer because we feel safe. And the result is that we sort of from that place run into crisis after crisis. And that's the way that we learn by running our head against the wall and noticing this isn't working. But there's another way to learn, which is just simply by bringing more awareness into the process, by being more vulnerable and open to not to know. And that's magic. I mean, the whole innovation process as a whole, and specifically with an AI, is an emerging process, which means it's very fluid, it's ever-changing, it's going faster and faster and faster. And so there's no one person out there who knows the answers.
It's so fascinating. And I think maybe this is unintentional with your analogy earlier of taking $100 and lighting it on fire. Hopefully, if you're doing it right, you're only lighting $100 on fire and you're not lighting $10 million on fire. And so in the beginning, when you're testing things, what's the most efficient way to test to get the right signal about whether you continue or not, so that you don't spend $10 million on all of those initiatives to find out which ones are the right ones, because you're going to run out of money if you do that.
Right. And so that's for me, the set of two extremes that I've personally experienced and seen within the corporate innovation space at large is either people give some innovation group $50 million and say, okay, you go run. Or they say, all right, here's $50 million. Show me how you're going to turn this into 100 by tomorrow. And so both approaches don't really work, because in the first one, what ends up happening is that there isn't any transparency. There isn't any accountability. There is possibly a misuse, or just simply leadership isn't ready to support whichever wins are going to come through the innovation when it's ready. They need to be part of the journey. Leadership needs to be a part of this innovation journey. It doesn't work any other way. And on the other side, when I ask the innovation group to deliver X output by this time, what I'm actually doing is that I'm taking away the capacity of the team to operate in an uncertain space, because I ask them to execute on something that they believe they know at a certain point, but that most likely won't be true tomorrow. And so that's really where we kind of need to find this middle path. And that middle path allows us to really effectively mitigate risk throughout the process and just continue learning. And with that, also maximize ROI. Everybody wins in the end.
Love it. So we've talked about the need for dealing with uncertainty and the need for transformation, the role of the team, the role of senior leaders. I guess specifically, have you encountered any other barriers to operating in this new way? And do you have any recommendations on how to overcome those barriers?
I would say every transformation is a process. And at the center of this process are the people. And the biggest challenges that arise is typically because of the way we collaborate, that individuals just aren't ready yet. And so from my experience, what's been really supportive in the way that I have led the transformation at Sage is, for one, that when we were acquired with Compass, I said, I don't care how much money you pay me. I don't care what title you give me. But the one thing that I want is that I want to have as much freedom as possible. And that put us on a path where we didn't have to go through the procurement processes. We didn't have to go through the salary bands. We didn't have to go through like all of the existing structures for the most part. Obviously, there's still some friction that occurred, but we really had this incredible freedom that allowed us to build a team from scratch that could drive this AI transformation. So we were able to handpick the right people. We're able to create our own processes. We're able to create a culture that really allowed us to effectively innovate, and even went as far as building our own identity, kind of positioning ourselves as an innovation hub within Sage to the rest of the world, which was really supportive in being able to get the kind of talent and that was necessary. And beyond the fact that we kind of took our work to escape velocity and really had a significant impact on the overarching business, we also started to test new ways of working that then the rest of the organization could start adopting. So there's lots of sort of additional benefits that we saw that came from us having that sort of freedom in how we operate. And then the second part of the transformation work was actually working really hand in hand with the corporation, which is, as we get the freedom, I would say the other side of the coin is the responsibility of really engaging with the rest of the corporation and taking also people by the hand. So, we established an education program for people to start to learn about AI. What's possible? What are use cases? How does this whole thing work? And so just doing that education for executives, leadership, but also other groups within the organization that we engaged with was something that was important. Also, we brought in you guys, an innovation leadership conference that I helped organize. And the reason that it was so important to bring in voice was that it sort of helped to build momentum around kind of a mind shift change. Like it helped the leadership to start to see the world from a different place, to change the perspective. And that really created an opening for us so that as we started to bring in more and more of the executives, leadership into our innovation process, they participated in demo days. There was already kind of like an openness or an interest. And then once they kind of hit the ground running and started to see how is it to take a more data-driven approach? How is it to like really listen to the signals we're getting from the market? That then really brought it home. Those are the experiences for leadership where they thought be happening everywhere. We should always do this. We should always have this approach that we listen to the client, that we listen to the signals that we're getting and to operate from that place. And so I would say that obviously engaging with the organization, starting in a gentle and kind way to start to kind of communicate the changes that are necessary. And there's frustration that came up for me many times, but it's just like staying in the process and really working with people until it lands, and not to be shy to bring in help from the outside if it's needed, because sometimes you just need that sort of little bit of a critical mass in the room to start to kind of bring home certain perspective shifts. And then to really involve leadership and executives into the process, because the more they are part of it, the more they will start to grok it and become advocates, champions of it. And so I would say that was another big piece that was really important.
That's great. I've got two more questions, and then we're going to have to wrap it up because unfortunately we're almost out of time. We've talked about governance. We've talked about teams, a little bit about the work that those teams do. Any guidance in terms of metrics or KPIs that you could recommend for fellow corporate AI executives where they can use that to hold teams accountable?
So I would say my general perspective on a governance model is, first of all, it's something that is going to be a little different in every company. And it's a collaborative process where, in our case, we had the kind of performance reporting group, and some internal innovation groups that, work closely with us and starting to formulate this. And I would say I initiated the process because felt that there was such a stark disconnect between what I used to report and what we were actually doing on the ground. And I was like, this just doesn't make sense. Like, I want there to be more of kind of an alignment with the rest of the organization. And so that's when I initiated this conversation about a different governance model, which is simply more aligned with the innovation process. And what that means is that, and this is sort of my own language here, but every bet that a company initiates goes through innovation process that begins with an idea and then goes through some initial discovery process where we try to get to problem solution fit. So we're trying to validate that there is an actual problem and we can articulate and validate in some way that there's a solution for it. And those markers initially can be, and it obviously depends on the problem, but it tends to be more qualitative. So I might talk to 10 people, or I might get some kind of like pre-sale where somebody says, okay, I'm willing to put some money down because I want this. There's some kind of qualitative measure. And then from that, we're getting into a place where we try to get product market fit. Now, product market fit, again, it depends. What is the market? Is the market the finance department, or is the market some external customer? And I would say the general measure here, one that Sean Ellis popularized a long time ago, was to get to like a 40% must-have status. But again, this can be measured in retention, it can be measured in churn, it can be measured in our kind of daily active users, it can be measured in all sorts of ways. That really depends on the particular solution that we're working on. And then once we kind of hit that product market fit, that's when we start to take something that's working and we try to get to a repeatable, scalable business model. And what that means is that on some fashion, we're trying to get to a set of positive unit economics. So very simplified, but we put $1 in, we get 5 out. And once we achieve that, then we can start to press the gas pedal, and that's when we can start to scale. And then as you go through scaling, again, there's different ways of kind of measuring the scaling process. So what I'm saying here is all very high level, but those are kind of the general steps that I see that you walk through with each and every single bet. And the governance essentially requires that there's some specific questions and some kind of terminology around like what validation means, etc., that's established so that we all have a common language as we establish a governance model like that.
Bjoern, this has been amazing. And so just really good concrete advice for our listeners. So thank you so much. I guess my last question, and you've already done several of these, but do you have any other just kind of top insights from your journey that you can share with fellow corporate AI leaders about turning AI-driven innovation into a core competency?
I would say for me personally, what's been really exciting and fun about the journey that was difficult, and there's been lots of frustration and struggles along the way, but it's also been very rewarding, is that it's a transformation that doesn't just deliver a bottom line, but it's also a transformation that gives an organization the opportunity to become more humane, to become more fluid, to allow people to show up more as themselves, to create an organization that, because it's more fluid, because it's less control oriented, is more fun. And so I believe that people who've been working in my team and who've worked with us across the rest of the organization on our projects, they had a lot of fun. It's just a lot of fun to do innovation in a safe environment and to have the support. And usually when people have fun, good stuff happens. And you actually get to some good results. And that really is, I would say, a paradigm shift for most people to even think that, I would say there's this sense that success means I need to work hard. I need to be in a place where I'm struggling really hard. That's an indicator of I'm doing something well. And that completely isn't true for innovation. So in innovation, the more you're struggling, the more your mind is closed, the slower you are, the less you're actually able to read the signal, the less you're able to actually drive change. And so creating a fluid container in an organization that drives this AI transformation is key, and it's fun. And so I would say that that part for me was the most rewarding, kind of on a human level. And I would say more broadly that at the cusp of transforming not just our individual companies, but our economy, the way we work. And if we choose to drive an AI transformation like this, we participate in these changes and we can shape them in a way that are positive. And I feel like that's really what's needed today, is that people step up, they are part of this transformation, and they make it a transformation that's good and that doesn't create sort of negative externalities, that both benefits the company itself, the clients, but also society at large. And so for me, it's sort of the full gambit of having fun on the ground, creating really cool new solutions, driving value for the business, and being part of a transformation that we're going through as a society and having a positive impact.
Inspiring. Bjoern, thank you so much. This has been a real treat, and hopefully we'll have you back on the podcast soon.
Thank you. Same here.
The Lean AI podcast is brought to you by Lean Startup Co. To find out more about our Lean AI approach to generating more AI wins with far less wasted time and investment, including our training workshops, pilot programs, and full implementation offerings, visit us at www.leanstartup.co. Search the Lean AI podcast in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Lean Startup Co., thanks for listening and sharing with your colleagues and friends if you found this episode insightful.